weekly paper. My last line there was, this year is also the 200th anniversary of Waterloo. What would have happened if Napoleon had won? Perhaps he's having the last laugh after all with the process of European integration. And in fact, so the Daily Express came out with Forsyth's page, and the headline was, Napoleon's going to have the last laugh. And it's, in fact, the online edition of his page has a portrait of Napoleon in colour. And in fact, so habeas corpus, which is very important. Now, the Corpus Juris project found opposition in England. The Daily Telegraph ran a week of articles warning everybody about it towards the end of 1998. This led to parliamentary questions. The Home Office minister who happened to be fielding questions on that day was Kate Hoey. I have to say, bless her cotton socks, because she read Corpus Juris and was horrified by it, although she was a member of the Blair government, which was all pro-full European integration, even adopting the euro. And so she promised Parliament that the government would veto it if it was ever formally proposed. So it had to be formally proposed. But and then the House of Lords produced a weighty report on Corpus Juris, rejecting it, saying this is not the way forward. So it's been put on the back burner since then. Of course, if the referendum goes that we're going to be in the European Union, then I think all British resistance to these further steps to full political and legal integration will crumble away. So this is what we can expect. A system similar to the Italian one to be introduced into Britain, or to the whole of Europe, according to the Corpus Juris blueprint, which now there have been arguments, you see. Some people have said that Magna Carta is a beacon for the whole civilized world. The master of the roads wrote in his essay on the Magna Carta website, the whole civilized world is influenced by Magna Carta. Presumably, he does not exclude France and Italy from, and other countries in continental Europe, from the civilized world. But the reality, as documented in painstaking detail by Italo Marino, historical detail, is that it's not. And that Magna Carta had no influence here. And they say that, well, of course, the European Convention on Human Rights is adopted by everybody in Europe, so everything's fine. You know, we all share the same basic values. But the trouble is you have to read the small print, and you have to read it carefully. Because what does the European Convention on Human Rights say about, for instance, the rights of habeas corpus? Well, Article 6 says every prisoner has a right to a public hearing before an impartial tribunal in a reasonable time. But what is reasonable? For Britain, it's a few hours or at the most a few days. If it's a terrorist charge and there's a lot of conflict, maybe a few days, up to a week, I think. No, they just introduced a bill up to 28 days, the very maximum, and there was a huge hoo-ha about that in Parliament. But over here, it's 6 months, it can be more, and one time it was 5.5 years at the height of the terrorist crisis at the sort of end of the 70s, and there was a case of a man who was kept in prison for 5.5 years, and he took his case to the European Court of Human Rights and lost it. So, because you see, the judges here will say, but we need all this time to investigate, to find evidence, to find, to be able to pin the person down. because they put them in prison on the basis of suspicion. I'll just terminate with a particular case. This is a gentleman who was the finance director of a company called Fastweb, which you may have heard of. You may have been bombarded with their emails like I am. And they had a big investigation a few years ago against the founder of Fastweb, a man called Silvio Scaglia. And this chap, whose name is Mario Rossetti, and he said, credo nella giustizia dei tribunali, non in quella delle carceri. He was arrested, put in prison, kept there for quite a long time. It doesn't say here exactly how long. And then in the end, he was acquitted. And he said that it was la pena preventiva. This is preventive punishment. In fact, the subtitle of Mereu's book is To Suspect and to Punish. They start punishing when they suspect by putting it in prison. Of course, it's not called pena, it's called custodia cautelare. It used to be called carcere preventivo, which means preventive prison, and now it's called precautionary custody. That was the reform, one of the aspects of the reform, to change the name of things, but it's still the same. And so he said, mentre parliamo ci sono circa, this is in the current March issue of the Corriere della Sera supplement. Mentre parliamo ci sono circa 10.000 persone in carcere senza aver subito neanche il processo di primo grado. As we speak, there are about 10,000 people in prison without having even had their first level of trial, because, as you know, it's 3 levels up to the Supreme Court of Cassation. And according to the Italian Constitution, everyone is to be considered innocent until the final verdict by the Supreme Court of Cassation. It doesn't stop them, they may consider people innocent, it doesn't stop them treating them as if they were guilty. Anyway, and while this was happening, when they were going through these people's papers, they found the name of an Englishman called Colin Dines, who had been in some business relationship with Fastweb. And they said, oh, that is probably involved as well. My source for this information is the Daily Mail, because it didn't come out in other papers. And Colin Dines happened to be a retired British judge. And they wrote out a European arrest warrant for him. He was, the British police had to execute it, because one of the problems with the European arrest warrant is that if a country, when one European country wants to arrest somebody who's in another European country, they write out a European arrest warrant. And the country that receives the arrest warrant is not allowed to ask for evidence or for details of the case against the person. That's entirely up to the country that is requesting. And evidently, when Parliament last November voted to reconfirm the European arrest warrant, evidently they all thought that people don't get arrested without evidence anywhere in Europe. They haven't studied, because there's no university chair of comparative criminal procedure anywhere in Britain. They hadn't studied the workings of criminal procedure in other European countries, evidently. Or they couldn't have voted for such a measure. But they did. And Colin Dines, a retired British judge, was awakened by the police in his home in Somerset, or wherever it was he lived, and they hauled him out of bed, bundled him off, trussed him up, and sent him over, and he spent some time, I don't know how long, in Rebibbia. But then I suppose eventually he was released and went back. But, it was a very traumatic experience. And it just shows that it is safe. If this can happen to a British judge, it can happen to anybody. And I think, I might say, I rest my case, as they say in court, as barristers say. I rest my case. If anyone has any questions, comment, I'd be happy to field them.